Imagine walking into a room where 4 people are against you. 4 minds, 4 opinions, 4 voices, 4 people who agree with one another and disagree with you. Most people immediately assume they have already lost. After all, what chance does one person have against 4? Human beings have been conditioned to fear numbers. We trust crowds, we obey crowds, we follow crowds, and when enough people repeat the same idea, we often mistake popularity for truth. But history reveals a strange pattern. Again and again, a single individual has managed to defeat entire groups without throwing a single punch. Socrates challenged Athens. Galileo challenged the scientific establishment. Nietzsche challenged morality. Carl Jung challenged the psychological orthodoxy of his time. One person against many, and yet the many lost. Why? Because power is not determined by numbers. Power is determined by perception. The greatest psychological mistake people make is believing that social reality is objective. It isn't. Social reality is a game of narratives, and whoever controls the narrative often controls the outcome. Most conflicts are won long before they become visible. The battle is fought in minds, not on battlefields. Long before armies clash, stories are created. Long before arguments begin, assumptions are planted. Long before people choose sides, emotions have already made the decision for them. This is the hidden world of psychological warfare, a world where the strongest person is not the loudest, not the richest, not even the smartest, but the one who understands human nature. Because groups possess a weakness that individuals rarely recognize. The larger the group becomes, the easier it becomes to manipulate. This sounds paradoxical. After all, shouldn't 4 minds be more intelligent than one? Not necessarily. Carl Jung once observed that individuals within a crowd often descend to a lower level of consciousness. The crowd does not amplify intelligence. It amplifies emotion. It amplifies fear. It amplifies conformity. And this is where the lone individual gains an unexpected advantage. Because while the group is busy seeking agreement, the individual remains free to think. While the crowd searches for certainty, the individual can exploit uncertainty. While the group protects its collective ego, the individual can attack its hidden contradictions. The result is something few people understand. One person can dismantle 4 people psychologically, without violence, without threats, without raising their voice, simply by understanding the invisible mechanisms governing human behavior. But there is a darker side to this knowledge. The same principles that can protect you from manipulation can also be used to manipulate others. The same insights that create freedom can create control. The same psychology that wins conflicts can destroy lives. This is why throughout history, such knowledge has often been hidden beneath philosophy, strategy, and mythology. Because knowledge of the human mind is power, and power is dangerous in the wrong hands. In this exploration, we will uncover the psychological principles that allow one person to overcome many. We will examine Carl Jung's theories of the shadow, the hidden weaknesses of group dynamics, the dark psychology of social dominance, the power of emotional control, and the ancient strategies that reveal why the strongest person in the room is often the one who appears to do nothing at all. Because the greatest victory is the one achieved without fighting. And by the end of this video, you may never look at conflict the same way again. Most people enter conflict with the wrong objective. They want to win. At first glance, this seems logical. If there is a disagreement, a competition, or a confrontation, then victory appears to be the ultimate goal. But this is precisely where many people lose. Because the moment you become obsessed with winning, you unknowingly surrender control. Your emotions become attached to the outcome. Your ego becomes invested, and once your ego becomes involved, you become predictable. This is one of the oldest principles of psychological warfare. The person who needs victory the most is often the easiest to manipulate. Observe 2 individuals engaged in an argument. One is calm, the other desperately wants to prove they are right. Who possesses more power? Most people assume the louder person has more influence, yet the opposite is often true. The calm individual is controlling the emotional temperature of the interaction. They are not reacting, they are observing. And observation is one of the deadliest psychological weapons ever discovered. Carl Jung understood something profound about human beings. People rarely reveal themselves directly. Instead, they reveal themselves indirectly, through emotional reactions, through insecurities, through irrational behavior, through what Jung called projections. Projection occurs when a person unconsciously attributes their own hidden characteristics to others. A liar constantly accuses others of dishonesty. An insecure individual constantly criticizes others. A manipulative person assumes everyone else is manipulative. The unconscious mind exposes itself through accusation. This means that whenever conflict begins, people often reveal more about themselves than about their opponents. Most individuals never notice this. They become distracted by words, but psychologically intelligent people focus on emotional patterns, because emotions tell the truth long before words do. Imagine 4 people standing against you. Each person appears confident. Each person agrees with one another. At first they seem unified, strong, unbreakable. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Each individual carries private fears, private insecurities, private ambitions, private resentments. The group appears united externally. Internally, however, it is often fragmented. This is one of the greatest illusions in social psychology. Groups appear stronger than they actually are. Human beings instinctively fear social consensus. When multiple people agree on something, our primitive brain interprets this as evidence. Yet agreement does not necessarily indicate truth. It merely indicates alignment, and alignment can be manufactured. History is filled with examples. Entire populations have believed false ideas. Entire societies have supported destructive leaders. Entire nations have participated in collective delusions. The crowd is not immune to error. In many cases, the crowd amplifies error. This phenomenon fascinated psychologists throughout the 20th century. Researchers repeatedly discovered that individuals often abandon their own perceptions when confronted by unanimous groups. Even when the group is obviously wrong, the fear of social isolation becomes stronger than the desire for truth. Think about that carefully. Many people would rather be accepted than correct. They would rather belong than think independently, and this creates an extraordinary vulnerability, because once a person's need for belonging exceeds their commitment to reality, they become controllable. The crowd begins to shape their identity, their opinions, their beliefs, their behavior, their perception of themselves. The result is a subtle form of psychological captivity. The individual no longer thinks, the group thinks for them. Carl Jung recognized this danger. He warned repeatedly about the psychological effects of collective consciousness. According to Jung, individuals possess a unique relationship with their unconscious mind, but when people merge into groups, individuality often dissolves. Independent thought becomes weaker. Collective emotions become stronger. Fear spreads more quickly. Anger spreads more quickly. Hatred spreads more quickly. The crowd develops its own personality, and this collective personality is often less mature than the individuals who compose it. In other words, intelligent people can become irrational when operating as a group. History provides endless examples: crowds cheering for violence, communities supporting persecution, organizations destroying talented individuals, not because everyone involved was evil, but because collective emotion overwhelmed individual awareness. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. The group's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness, its unity, because unity creates dependence, and dependence creates vulnerability. Consider 4 people standing against one person. The 4 individuals derive confidence from each other. Their courage is collective. Their certainty is collective. Their authority is collective. Remove the collective structure and much of that confidence disappears. This is why psychologically sophisticated individuals rarely confront groups directly. Instead, they disrupt the psychological bonds holding the group together. Ancient military strategists understood this principle long before modern psychology existed. Sun Tzu repeatedly emphasized the importance of attacking strategy rather than soldiers. Destroying cohesion was often more effective than destroying armies, because when unity collapses, power collapses. The same principle applies to everyday life. The strongest person in a confrontation is rarely the most aggressive. The strongest person is usually the one who understands hidden dynamics. Imagine 4 co-workers criticizing someone in a meeting. Most people would become defensive. They would argue, explain, justify, fight back, and in doing so, they would reinforce the group's unity. Everyone becomes focused on defeating the target, but a psychologically intelligent person recognizes something different. They recognize that groups survive through shared emotional energy. The moment that emotional energy is disrupted, cohesion begins to weaken. A simple question can achieve more than an hour of argument. A moment of silence can create more discomfort than endless explanations. A calm observation can expose contradictions nobody wants to acknowledge. Suddenly, the group's certainty begins to crack, and once doubt enters the system, everything changes. Because certainty is the fuel that powers collective behavior. Without certainty, the crowd becomes unstable. This is why many powerful leaders throughout history focused primarily on perception, not force, not violence, perception. They understood that human beings respond less to objective reality and more to interpreted reality. If people perceive you as powerful, they treat you differently. If people perceive you as weak, they treat you differently. The perception itself begins creating reality. This psychological principle explains why confidence can sometimes defeat competence, why appearances influence judgment, why charisma influences authority, and why one individual can influence entire groups. Human beings do not merely react to facts, they react to meanings, and meanings can be shaped. This does not mean reality is irrelevant. Reality ultimately matters, but in social interactions, perception often determines immediate outcomes. The person who controls perception controls emotional responses. The person who controls emotional responses controls behavior. And the person who controls behavior controls the direction of the conflict. This is why psychological warfare rarely looks like warfare. It looks like patience, observation, timing, restraint. Most people expect power to appear dramatic, but true psychological power often appears invisible. A master chess player does not win because of a single move. Victory emerges from a series of subtle decisions made long before the final moment. Likewise, psychological dominance is rarely achieved through direct confrontation. It emerges through understanding fears, understanding motivations, understanding insecurities, understanding desires, because every human being possesses psychological blind spots, and those blind spots create predictable patterns. Carl Jung referred to one of the most important of these blind spots as the shadow. The shadow contains everything an individual refuses to acknowledge about themselves: their aggression, their envy, their selfishness, their fear, their desire for control, their hunger for power. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy pretending these qualities do not exist. Yet repression does not eliminate them, it merely pushes them into the unconscious, and what remains unconscious eventually seeks expression. The shadow begins influencing behavior indirectly, through projection, through resentment, through irrational reactions, through conflict. This means that whenever people become emotionally triggered, their shadow often becomes visible. The person who understands shadows gains access to hidden information that others unknowingly reveal, information that can completely transform the balance of power. Because beneath every argument exists a deeper psychological reality. The argument itself is rarely the real issue. The real issue is often hidden beneath layers of unconscious emotion. Someone arguing about respect may actually fear insignificance. Someone arguing about loyalty may actually fear abandonment. Someone arguing about authority may actually fear powerlessness. The visible conflict is merely a symptom. The invisible conflict is the cause, and those who can see the invisible conflict possess a tremendous advantage. This is the first secret of defeating four people without fighting. Do not focus on the battle everyone can see. Focus on the battle nobody can see, because while others are fighting externally, the true struggle is occurring internally, within fears, within insecurities, within identity, within shadows. The crowd believes power belongs to numbers. Psychology reveals something different. Power belongs to awareness, and awareness belongs to the individual willing to see what others refuse to see. The person who understands human nature is never truly outnumbered, because while others are counting people, they are counting weaknesses, and that changes everything. One of the greatest misconceptions about power is the belief that groups are naturally stable. From a distance, a group appears solid, unified, coordinated, strong. Four people standing together against one individual create an image of overwhelming superiority. But appearances are deceptive. What most people fail to understand is that every group contains invisible tensions. Tensions hidden beneath smiles, hidden beneath agreements, hidden beneath loyalty. The stronger a group's appearance, the more carefully these tensions are often concealed. Carl Jung believed that human beings wear masks. He called these masks the persona. The persona is the version of ourselves we present to the world. It is the social identity we construct to gain acceptance, to avoid rejection, to fit into society. But every mask creates a problem. The more energy invested into maintaining an image, the more reality must be hidden behind it. This principle applies not only to individuals, but also to groups. Groups possess personas too. Every group projects a certain image. We are united. We are loyal. We all think alike. We support one another. Yet beneath this collective mask lies a different reality: competition, jealousy, resentment, status struggles, fear, unspoken disagreements. The illusion of unity often hides a battlefield. This is why psychological conflicts are rarely won by attacking the group directly. Direct attacks usually strengthen unity. The moment an external threat appears, members instinctively move closer together. Their differences temporarily disappear. Their conflicts become secondary. Survival becomes the priority. This is basic tribal psychology. Throughout human evolution, belonging to a tribe increased chances of survival. Isolation often meant death. As a result, human beings evolved powerful instincts that prioritize group protection. When attacked from outside, tribes become stronger, but when contradictions emerge from within, tribes begin to fracture. This distinction is crucial. If you want to understand how one person can overcome four people psychologically, you must understand the difference between external pressure and internal pressure. External pressure creates cohesion. Internal pressure creates collapse. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. Empires rarely fall because of enemies alone. Corporations rarely fail because of competitors alone. Friend groups rarely break apart because of outsiders alone. Most collapses begin internally. The seeds of destruction already exist. The external event merely exposes them. Think of a crack hidden inside a wall. From the outside, the wall appears strong, solid, reliable, but pressure gradually reveals what was already there. The same is true of human groups. The psychological crack already exists. The challenge is learning to see it. Most people never do. They focus on surface behavior. Who said what? Who appears confident? Who seems dominant? But psychological awareness requires looking beneath appearances, because every group contains hierarchies, even groups that claim equality. Someone wants more influence. Someone wants more recognition. Someone feels overlooked. Someone feels superior. Someone secretly believes they deserve a higher position. These desires rarely disappear. They simply become hidden, and hidden desires are often the most powerful. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this deeply. He argued that human beings are driven by what he called the will to power, not merely power over others, but the desire to expand one's influence, to overcome limitations, to express one's strength, to become significant. This drive exists within nearly everyone. The quiet person, the confident person, the leader, the follower, the rebel, the conformist. Everyone seeks significance in different ways, and wherever significance becomes scarce, competition emerges. Now imagine four individuals united against a single target. At first, they appear aligned, but beneath the surface, another process is occurring. Each person is unconsciously evaluating their own position within the group. Who has the most authority? Who receives the most attention? Who appears strongest? Who is most respected? These questions operate continuously beneath awareness. The target may believe they are facing one unified force. In reality, they are often facing four separate egos, temporarily cooperating. That distinction changes everything, because cooperation built upon ego is fragile. The stronger the ego, the greater the instability. Why? Because ego seeks validation, and validation is limited. If one person receives recognition, another person receives less. If one person gains status, another person loses relative status. This creates subtle psychological competition that remains invisible until pressure exposes it. Carl Jung observed that unconscious conflicts often emerge during periods of stress. People can maintain harmony when circumstances are easy, but difficulty reveals hidden dynamics. Stress exposes reality. Pressure removes masks. Conflict reveals character. This is why psychological strategists pay close attention to moments of uncertainty, because uncertainty weakens collective confidence. And when confidence weakens, suppressed tensions begin to surface. Suddenly, disagreements emerge, questions arise, doubts spread. The certainty that once held everyone together begins to dissolve. This process often happens gradually, then suddenly, a single contradiction, a single misunderstanding, a single challenge, and the group starts questioning itself. What once appeared unbreakable becomes unstable. This phenomenon explains why some organizations collapse almost overnight. Observers assume the collapse was sudden. In reality, the collapse was years in the making. The visible breakdown was merely the final stage. The psychological damage already existed beneath the surface. This brings us to one of the most important lessons in dark psychology. Never mistake appearance for reality, especially in groups. The loudest person is not always the strongest. The most confident person is not always the most secure. The most united group is not always the most stable. Often, the opposite is true. Excessive confidence frequently conceals insecurity. Excessive unity frequently conceals fear. Excessive certainty frequently conceals doubt. Human beings overcompensate for what they secretly lack. This creates predictable patterns. A person terrified of appearing weak becomes obsessed with displaying strength. A person uncertain about their intelligence becomes obsessed with proving they are right. A group afraid of collapse becomes obsessed with displaying unity. The display itself becomes evidence of the hidden fear. Jung would have recognized this as compensation. The psyche constantly attempts to balance itself. When something is missing internally, individuals often exaggerate the opposite externally. The same dynamic operates within groups. This means that beneath every display of certainty may exist uncertainty. Beneath every display of confidence may exist fear. Beneath every display of loyalty may exist resentment. The psychologically aware individual learns to look for these compensations, not to exploit them maliciously, but to understand reality, because reality is rarely what people present. Reality is often what people conceal. Now consider the lone individual again. One person facing four. Most people immediately focus on numbers. But numbers only matter when cohesion exists. Without cohesion, numbers become meaningless. Four disconnected individuals are not stronger than one psychologically integrated person. In many situations, they are weaker because integration creates stability. Carl Jung believed psychological development required integrating the shadow, accepting uncomfortable truths about oneself, acknowledging fears, acknowledging flaws, acknowledging aggression, acknowledging vulnerability. The person who integrates these qualities becomes less reactive, less defensive, less dependent upon external validation, more stable, more grounded, more difficult to manipulate. Why? Because manipulation relies upon unconscious weaknesses. If someone is unaware of their fears, those fears can control them. If someone is unaware of their insecurities, those insecurities can be exploited. If someone is unaware of their shadow controls them from behind the scenes. But awareness changes everything. Awareness transforms weakness into understanding. Understanding transforms vulnerability into strength. This is why self-knowledge becomes a weapon. Not against others, but against manipulation, against fear, against unconscious control. The integrated individual possesses something rare, inner unity, and inner unity often proves stronger than collective unity, because collective unity depends on external agreement. Inner unity depends on internal alignment. External agreement can disappear overnight. Internal alignment endures. The crowd often mistakes noise for power, but genuine power is frequently silent. A lion does not need to announce its strength. A mountain does not need to prove its size. And psychologically powerful individuals rarely feel compelled to dominate every interaction. Their confidence emerges from within, not from applause, not from approval, not from social validation. This creates an extraordinary advantage, because groups frequently rely upon emotional reactions. They seek reassurance, recognition, confirmation, agreement. The integrated individual does not, and when someone no longer depends on approval, they become difficult to control. This is why the strongest psychological position is often detachment, not indifference, not coldness, but freedom from emotional dependency, the ability to remain centered regardless of circumstances, the ability to observe without immediately reacting, the ability to remain calm while others become emotional. This is where true psychological warfare begins, not with manipulation, not with aggression, but with mastery of oneself, because before you can understand the weaknesses of groups, you must first understand your own weaknesses. Before you can recognize projections, you must recognize your own projections. Before you can navigate social conflict, you must navigate inner conflict. The person who conquers themselves possesses an advantage no crowd can easily overcome, and this reveals the second secret of defeating four people without fighting. Groups collapse when hidden contradictions emerge. but the individual only benefits if they are not ruled by contradictions themselves. The crowd may possess numbers, the crowd may possess influence, the crowd may possess social authority, but the psychologically integrated individual possesses something far more dangerous: clarity. And clarity has dismantled empires, movements, institutions, and crowds throughout history, because while others become trapped inside collective illusions, the person with clarity sees the cracks nobody else notices. And once those cracks become visible, collapse is only a matter of time. There is a strange phenomenon that occurs in nearly every human interaction. Two people can witness the same event, hear the same words, observe the same behavior, yet walk away with completely different conclusions. Why? Because human beings do not experience reality directly, they experience their interpretation of reality, and interpretation is influenced by perception. This simple fact has shaped wars, religions, revolutions, relationships, and entire civilizations. The person who understands perception understands one of the most powerful forces in existence. Most people assume power comes from physical strength, others believe it comes from money, some believe it comes from authority. But beneath all forms of power lies perception, because power only exists when people believe it exists. A king remains a king because people recognize his authority. A celebrity remains influential because people grant attention. A leader remains powerful because others perceive leadership. The moment perception changes, power changes. History repeatedly demonstrates this truth. Empires have collapsed overnight. Currencies have become worthless. Leaders have fallen from grace, not because physical reality changed immediately, but because perception changed first. The psychological foundation disappeared, and once perception shifts, reality soon follows. This principle becomes extremely important when facing opposition, especially when facing multiple people. Most individuals enter social conflicts believing they must overpower others. They try to prove themselves, defend themselves, justify themselves, explain themselves, but every attempt at excessive justification creates an unintended consequence. It communicates uncertainty. Think carefully about this. Why do innocent people sometimes appear guilty? Because fear makes them over-explain. Why do insecure people often appear weak? Because insecurity creates excessive defensiveness. Why do confident people appear powerful? Because they rarely feel compelled to constantly prove themselves. Perception responds less to words than to emotional signals, and emotional signals are often unconscious. Carl Jung understood that human beings communicate on multiple levels simultaneously. Words represent only a fraction of communication. Beneath words exist emotions, symbols, archetypes, body language, tone, presence, energy. The unconscious mind constantly analyzes these signals, long before conscious thought occurs. This is why first impressions happen almost instantly. Within seconds, people form assumptions: trustworthy or untrustworthy, strong or weak, leader or follower, confident or insecure. Most people believe they are making rational judgments. In reality, they are responding to psychological cues, and these cues influence everything that follows. Imagine entering a room where 4 people oppose you. Most individuals immediately focus on the external situation: 4 against 1. Unfair odds, social pressure, potential embarrassment. The mind begins calculating risks. Anxiety increases, emotional control decreases, and this internal reaction becomes visible, perhaps not through words, but through posture, tone, facial expressions, micro-behaviors. The group senses uncertainty, and uncertainty attracts pressure. This is one of the harsh realities of human nature. People often test weakness, not always consciously, but instinctively. Just as animals assess vulnerability in nature, human beings assess vulnerability socially. The moment uncertainty appears, pressure increases. The moment confidence appears, pressure decreases. This creates a fascinating paradox. The strongest position often belongs to the person least affected by the situation, because emotional independence alters perception, and altered perception alters behavior. Carl Jung frequently discussed the psychological significance of the self. The self represents the integrated center of the psyche, the deeper identity beneath masks, beneath personas, beneath social roles. The individual connected to this deeper center possesses a unique quality: presence. Presence is difficult to define, yet everyone recognizes it when they encounter it. Some individuals enter a room and immediately attract attention, not because they are loud, not because they demand recognition, but because they possess psychological gravity. others feel it, even if they cannot explain it. This gravity emerges from internal coherence. A person aligned with themselves projects stability, and stability influences perception. Human beings naturally seek stability, especially during uncertainty. This explains why calm individuals often become leaders during crises, not necessarily because they possess the best solutions, but because they provide psychological certainty, and certainty is emotionally attractive. Now consider the dynamics of a group. Groups often rely on emotional momentum. Agreement creates momentum, validation creates momentum, shared certainty creates momentum. The moment momentum exists, individuals feel stronger than they actually are. But momentum depends on continuation. It requires constant reinforcement. This is why crowds become uncomfortable when confronted by someone who refuses to react as expected. Imagine 4 people attempting to provoke one person. They expect defensiveness, anger, fear, submission, excuses. Instead, the individual remains calm, observant, centered. Suddenly something unusual occurs. The group's expectations are disrupted. The emotional script fails. And when expectations fail, uncertainty enters the system. Psychologists refer to this as pattern interruption. Human beings depend heavily on predictable patterns. When patterns break unexpectedly, attention increases. The unconscious mind becomes alert. The group begins questioning its assumptions. What seemed certain moments ago becomes less certain, and uncertainty weakens collective confidence. This reveals one of the most powerful principles of psychological influence. The person who controls the emotional frame controls the interaction. Most people unconsciously enter another person's frame. They accept the emotional atmosphere presented to them. If someone is angry, they become defensive. If someone is aggressive, they become reactive. If someone is intimidating, they become anxious. The emotional environment controls their behavior, but psychologically skilled individuals do something different. They maintain their own frame, regardless of external pressure, regardless of emotional manipulation, regardless of social dynamics. This creates extraordinary influence, because emotional stability becomes contagious. Just as fear spreads through groups, calmness spreads through groups. Just as panic influences behavior, confidence influences behavior. The emotional state of one individual can affect an entire room. History provides countless examples: a single leader calming thousands, a single speech altering public perception, a single individual inspiring collective courage. This is not magic, it is psychology. Human beings constantly synchronize emotionally. We absorb the emotional states around us, often without realizing it. The person who remains emotionally grounded becomes an anchor, and anchors influence everything connected to them. This is why perception is never merely personal. Perception is social. The way you perceive yourself influences the way others perceive you, and the way others perceive you influences how they behave. This creates feedback loops. Confidence generates confidence, fear generates fear, certainty generates certainty, doubt generates doubt. The psychologically aware individual learns to manage these loops consciously, not through deception, but through self-mastery, because genuine confidence cannot be faked indefinitely. Eventually, reality exposes performance. Eventually, masks crack. Eventually, personas fail. Carl Jung warned repeatedly about identification with the persona. People become trapped inside the image they project. They mistake the mask for the self, and when the mask is threatened, they experience panic. Why? Because their identity depends upon external validation. Remove the audience and the identity collapses. This creates tremendous vulnerability. Groups frequently operate this way. Their confidence depends upon consensus. Their certainty depends upon agreement. Their strength depends upon social reinforcement. Remove reinforcement and stability weakens. The integrated individual operates differently. Their confidence emerges internally. Their certainty emerges internally. Their identity emerges internally. As a result, external pressure has less influence. This does not mean they are fearless. Fear remains part of human nature, but fear no longer controls them. There is an important distinction. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to act despite fear. The crowd often mistakes fearlessness for strength. In reality, awareness of fear creates greater strength, because awareness prevents unconscious control. Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious directs behavior from the shadows. Unconscious fear becomes hidden obedience. Unconscious insecurity becomes hidden weakness. Unconscious desire becomes hidden manipulation. Awareness transforms these forces. The individual begins recognizing their own psychological patterns. And once recognized, those patterns lose power. This is why self-awareness becomes a strategic advantage. The person who understands themselves becomes difficult to destabilize. The crowd cannot easily exploit weaknesses that are already acknowledged. Manipulation loses effectiveness when awareness increases, and awareness changes perception. Suddenly, criticism loses some of its sting. Rejection loses some of its terror. Disapproval loses some of its influence, because identity no longer depends entirely upon external judgment. This creates freedom, and freedom creates power. Not power over others, power over oneself. The ancient Stoics understood this principle centuries before modern psychology existed. They recognized that external events are often beyond control, but internal responses remain within control. The individual who masters responses becomes resilient. The crowd may create pressure. The crowd may create noise. The crowd may create intimidation. Yet resilience transforms these forces into background distractions. The centered individual remains focused. This focus alters perception, and altered perception alters outcomes. Because most social conflicts are not won through superior arguments, they are won through superior emotional control. People rarely remember every word spoken, but they remember how someone made them feel. They remember confidence, presence, calmness, composure. These qualities influence perception far more than logic alone. This explains why some individuals dominate rooms without saying much. Their presence communicates what words cannot. They appear comfortable with themselves. And comfort with oneself is rare. Most people are fighting invisible battles. Battles against insecurity, against self-doubt, against fear of rejection, against fear of insignificance. The individual who has confronted these battles possesses a unique advantage, not because they become superior, but because they become free from many of the chains controlling others, and freedom changes everything. This leads us to the third secret of defeating 4 people without fighting. Do not attempt to control others first. Control perception, control your emotional frame, control your reactions, control your attention, because perception shapes reality. The crowd believes power belongs to those who dominate externally. Psychology reveals something deeper. Power belongs to those who remain internally unconquered. The group may possess numbers, the group may possess social influence, the group may possess collective confidence, but if one individual possesses self-mastery, that individual possesses something the crowd cannot easily take away: presence. And presence often becomes the invisible force that changes the entire game. For while others are attempting to control the room, the psychologically aware individual is controlling themselves. And in the long run, that is the greater power. Human beings like to believe they are rational creatures. We tell ourselves that decisions are made logically, that respect is earned through merit, that influence comes from intelligence, that authority belongs to those who deserve it. Yet beneath civilization lies something far older, something inherited from millions of years of evolution, a hidden psychological operating system that still shapes human behavior today. This system does not ask who is right, it asks who is strong, who is confident, who belongs, who should be followed. The uncomfortable truth is that social hierarchies form almost automatically. Place strangers together in a room, give them enough time, and invisible structures begin to emerge. Leaders, followers, influencers, outsiders, dominant personalities, submissive personalities. No one consciously designs the hierarchy, yet it appears anyway. Carl Jung recognized that human behavior is deeply influenced by archetypes, ancient patterns embedded within the collective unconscious. These archetypes influence perception long before conscious thought begins. The king, the warrior, the magician, the sage, the rebel, the victim, the hero. Human beings instinctively respond to these symbolic patterns. They always have, throughout history, across cultures, across civilizations. This explains why certain individuals command attention the moment they enter a room. It is not always because they are the smartest. It is not always because they are the most attractive. It is not always because they possess official authority. Something deeper is happening. They unconsciously embody an archetype, and archetypes influence perception. The crowd responds, often without understanding why. Now imagine a situation where 4 people stand against one. Most observers immediately focus on numbers, but psychology focuses on hierarchy because numbers alone do not determine social outcomes. Hierarchy determines social outcomes. Within every group, there are hidden leaders, hidden followers, hidden influencers, and hidden observers. Not all voices carry equal weight. One individual may influence the entire group's thinking. Another may simply echo opinions. A third may secretly disagree but remain silent. A fourth may be waiting to see who gains the upper hand. This is why social dominance rarely operates the way people imagine. Most individuals assume dominance means aggression, intimidation, control, loudness, force. Yet true dominance often appears calm, silent, patient, controlled. Consider the lion. The lion does not constantly roar. It does not continuously prove its strength. It does not seek validation from every animal in the jungle. Its confidence emerges from certainty, and certainty is psychologically powerful. Human beings instinctively recognize certainty, not because certainty guarantees truth, but because certainty signals conviction, and conviction influences perception. The problem is that many people confuse certainty with arrogance. These are very different things. Arrogance seeks recognition. Certainty does not require it. Arrogance demands attention. Certainty attracts attention naturally. Arrogance depends upon validation. Certainty exists independently of validation. The distinction is crucial because groups often test certainty, especially when confronting an outsider. Imagine 4 people challenging one person publicly. Most individuals immediately feel pressure. The attention becomes overwhelming. The social risk increases. The fear of embarrassment activates, and emotional control begins to weaken. At this moment, something fascinating occurs. The group is not merely evaluating arguments. The group is evaluating emotional responses. How does the individual react? Do they panic? Do they become defensive? Do they seek approval? Do they apologize unnecessarily? Do they retreat psychologically? These signals communicate status, long before logic enters the conversation. This is why social dominance is often misunderstood. It is less about controlling others and more about controlling reactions. The person who remains centered communicates strength. The person who becomes emotionally destabilized communicates vulnerability. This does not mean emotions are weakness. Far from it. Emotions are part of being human. The issue is not feeling emotion. The issue is becoming controlled by emotion. Carl Jung repeatedly emphasized the importance of integrating the shadow. Many people fear their aggressive instincts, their assertiveness, their capacity for confrontation. As a result, they suppress these qualities. But suppression creates weakness. Anything rejected from consciousness gains power in the unconscious. The person who denies aggression becomes incapable of defending boundaries. The person who denies anger becomes vulnerable to exploitation. The person who denies strength becomes dependent upon approval. Jung understood that psychological growth requires integration, not repression. The mature individual acknowledges both light and darkness, compassion and strength, kindness and firmness, humility and confidence. This creates balance, and balance creates presence. The crowd often senses this immediately. Why? Because integrated individuals become difficult to predict. They are not trapped inside simplistic identities. They are not merely agreeable, nor are they merely aggressive. They can adapt, and adaptability is power. Nature demonstrates this repeatedly. Rigid systems break, flexible systems survive. The strongest tree during a storm is not always the largest. Often it is the one capable of bending. Human psychology operates similarly. The most dominant individual is not necessarily the most forceful. Often they are the most adaptable. They understand when to speak, when to remain silent, when to challenge, when to observe, when to advance, when to withdraw. This flexibility creates strategic advantage because groups frequently become trapped inside collective patterns. Once a group adopts a narrative, changing direction becomes difficult. Momentum takes over. Everyone reinforces everyone else's beliefs. Contradictions become uncomfortable. Questions become threatening. Dissent becomes dangerous. The group begins protecting its identity, and identity protection creates blindness. The psychologically aware individual recognizes this process. Rather than confronting the group's identity directly, they observe its weaknesses. Because every collective identity contains contradictions, every ideology contains blind spots, every group contains fears. The stronger the identity, the stronger the fear of losing it. This creates opportunities, not necessarily to manipulate, but to understand, because understanding changes power dynamics. The crowd often believes confidence comes from external support, but genuine confidence emerges from self-trust. And self-trust cannot be borrowed, it must be developed. This is why some individuals remain composed even when isolated, even when criticized, even when misunderstood. Their identity does not depend entirely upon social agreement. The crowd often interprets this as strength, and frequently it is. Psychologically speaking, independence is rare. Most people unconsciously seek permission. Permission to think, permission to act, permission to believe, permission to express themselves. The fear of social rejection influences countless decisions. People remain silent when they want to speak, agree when they disagree, conform when they wish to resist. Not because they are weak, but because belonging is deeply wired into human nature. Evolution rewarded social acceptance. Isolation historically carried severe consequences. These instincts still influence modern behavior, yet the individual who learns to tolerate disapproval gains extraordinary freedom. Freedom from constant social pressure, freedom from excessive conformity, freedom from emotional dependency, and freedom alters perception because people instinctively respect those who appear comfortable standing alone, not because standing alone is inherently admirable, but because it signals internal stability. The crowd often follows certainty, and certainty emerges from conviction. History provides countless examples. Revolutionaries, philosophers, inventors, artists, scientists. Many stood alone before they were understood. Many faced opposition, ridicule, isolation, resistance. Yet their willingness to tolerate rejection ultimately changed the world. This reveals a profound psychological truth. Social dominance is not fundamentally about controlling people. It is about controlling fear, especially the fear of rejection, the fear of exclusion, the fear of standing apart. The crowd often derives power from these fears, but when those fears diminish, the crowd loses leverage. This does not mean becoming arrogant or antisocial or indifferent. It means becoming psychologically autonomous, capable of thinking independently, capable of maintaining integrity, capable of remaining centered under pressure. Carl Jung referred to this process as individuation, the journey toward becoming oneself, not the self society demands, not the self others expect, but the authentic self. This journey is difficult because authenticity often requires confronting uncomfortable truths, shadow material, personal weaknesses, unresolved fears, hidden desires, internal contradictions. Many people avoid this process. The crowd offers comfort, belonging, certainty, protection, but comfort often comes at a cost. The cost is individuality. The cost is self-discovery. The cost is freedom. The individuated person accepts a different path, a more uncertain path, but also a more powerful one, because power rooted in authenticity cannot easily be taken away. Status can disappear, money can disappear, popularity can disappear, authority can disappear, but self-knowledge remains, and self-knowledge becomes a foundation, a psychological anchor, a source of resilience. This is why some individuals remain composed while others panic, remain calm while others react, remain focused while others become distracted. Their stability emerges internally, not externally, and internal stability influences social dynamics profoundly. The group senses it, even if unconsciously. The crowd may possess numbers, the crowd may possess approval, the crowd may possess collective momentum. Yet the individual possessing self-mastery possesses something equally powerful: psychological gravity, the ability to influence a room without demanding attention, the ability to command respect without aggression, the ability to remain strong without becoming hostile. This is the fourth secret of defeating four people without fighting. True dominance is not domination. True dominance is self-possession. The crowd often believes power comes from controlling others. Psychology reveals something deeper. Power comes from becoming difficult to control. And once a person reaches that point, they no longer need to fight for respect, because their presence communicates what words never could. The crowd sees confidence. The crowd sees certainty. The crowd sees strength. But what they are truly witnessing is something far rarer: a human being who is no longer ruled by fear. And that changes every interaction. There is a reason why certain individuals seem impossible to intimidate, a reason why some people remain calm when surrounded by opposition, a reason why a single person can sometimes stand against an entire crowd and refuse to bend. Most people assume these individuals possess extraordinary confidence. But confidence is only part of the story. The deeper explanation lies somewhere far darker. Carl Jung spent much of his life exploring a disturbing reality about human nature, a reality most people spend their entire lives avoiding. According to Jung, every human being possesses a hidden side, a side they do not wish to see, a side they do not wish others to see, a side buried beneath morality, social expectations, and personal identity. He called this hidden dimension the shadow. The shadow contains everything the conscious mind rejects: anger, aggression, envy, selfishness, cruelty, fear, lust for power, desire for revenge, forbidden impulses, unacceptable emotions, everything that threatens the image a person has of themselves. Most people believe becoming a good person means eliminating these qualities. Jung disagreed. He believed this was impossible. Nothing disappears simply because it is ignored. Nothing vanishes because it is denied. Repression is not transformation. Repression is concealment, and what is concealed continues operating beneath awareness. This is why seemingly kind individuals sometimes explode with rage, why moral people commit immoral acts, why calm individuals suddenly become destructive. The shadow never truly disappears. It waits, and when circumstances allow, it emerges. This insight terrified Jung, not because the shadow exists, but because most people remain unconscious of it. The unconscious shadow controls behavior from behind the scenes. It whispers through emotions, through reactions, through projections, through irrational decisions. A person may believe they are acting logically while secretly being controlled by hidden fears and desires. This creates one of the greatest vulnerabilities in human psychology. The individual who does not know their shadow can be manipulated by it, and manipulated people are predictable. They react automatically, they become emotionally triggered, they become defensive, they become controllable. Now consider the dynamics of social conflict. Imagine 4 people confronting one individual. The crowd expects fear, submission, compliance. Most people provide exactly that, not because they are weak, but because their shadow remains unconscious. Their deepest fear is exposed. Fear of rejection, fear of exclusion, fear of humiliation, fear of standing alone. The crowd senses this fear immediately, and fear changes everything. Because fear creates psychological dependence, the individual begins seeking approval, seeking acceptance, seeking safety. The crowd gains influence, the crowd gains leverage, the crowd gains power. But something entirely different happens when a person confronts their shadow, when they stop running from their darkness, when they stop pretending weakness does not exist, when they stop denying aggression, when they stop denying fear. Awareness changes the relationship completely. The shadow loses its ability to operate invisibly, and invisible forces are always the most dangerous. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This statement contains an extraordinary truth. Many people believe circumstances control them, but often it is unconscious psychology controlling them. They repeat patterns without understanding why, choose the same destructive relationships, make the same mistakes, experience the same fears, again and again. The shadow remains hidden, and hidden forces continue exerting influence. The person who faces the shadow begins breaking these patterns, not because they become perfect, but because they become aware. Awareness creates freedom, freedom creates power, and power rooted in awareness is fundamentally different from power rooted in dominance. This is where the archetype of the lone wolf begins to emerge. Popular culture often misunderstands the lone wolf. People imagine someone cold, detached, emotionless, antisocial. Jung would have disagreed. The true lone wolf is not someone who rejects humanity. The true lone wolf is someone who has developed independence from collective pressure, a person capable of belonging without becoming dependent, capable of connection without losing individuality, capable of standing alone when necessary. This distinction is critical because loneliness and independence are not the same thing. Loneliness is painful isolation. Independence is psychological freedom. One weakens the spirit, the other strengthens it. The crowd often fears independent individuals, not because they are dangerous, but because they are difficult to control. They do not automatically conform. They do not automatically submit. They do not automatically seek approval. Their decisions emerge from internal conviction, and conviction disrupts social pressure. History repeatedly demonstrates this phenomenon. Socrates refused to abandon his principles. Galileo refused to abandon his observations. Nietzsche refused to abandon his philosophy. Carl Jung refused to abandon his understanding of the psyche. All faced opposition. All faced criticism. All stood apart from prevailing opinion. And all paid a price, because individuation always carries a cost. The crowd rewards conformity. The crowd rewards predictability. The crowd rewards obedience. The individuated person often becomes an outsider, not intentionally, but inevitably, because independent thinking creates friction. The crowd experiences discomfort when confronted by someone who refuses to follow expected patterns. This discomfort reveals something profound. Many social structures depend upon unconscious agreement. Everyone silently agrees to play certain roles, to follow certain expectations, to maintain certain illusions. The individual who awakens from these patterns becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability creates psychological power. Not because unpredictability is inherently superior, but because manipulation depends upon predictability. The more predictable someone becomes, the easier they are to influence, the easier they are to pressure, the easier they are to control. The shadow plays a crucial role here. Most people fear their own aggression. As a result, they become incapable of asserting themselves. Others fear vulnerability. As a result, they become emotionally distant. Others fear weakness. As a result, they become obsessed with strength. Every unintegrated fear creates imbalance. Every imbalance creates vulnerability. The integrated individual seeks balance instead, not perfection, balance, strength without cruelty, confidence without arrogance, compassion without weakness, humility without submission. This balance creates psychological stability, and stability influences perception. The crowd often mistakes balance for power, because balance resembles power. A person comfortable with themselves appears grounded, centered, calm, difficult to provoke, difficult to manipulate, difficult to intimidate. Not because they are fearless, but because they have confronted fear. This is one of Jung's deepest insights. Courage emerges not from avoiding darkness, but from facing it. The individual who accepts their shadow gains access to hidden energy, energy previously consumed by repression, energy previously consumed by fear, energy previously consumed by maintaining masks. Suddenly more attention becomes available, more awareness, more presence, more authenticity, and authenticity possesses extraordinary influence. Human beings instinctively recognize authenticity, even if they cannot explain it. The authentic person feels real. The crowd feels this immediately. Why? Because most people wear masks. Professional masks, social masks, moral masks, success masks, strength masks. Everyone performs. To some degree, the authentic individual performs less, and this creates contrast. The crowd notices. The crowd responds, often unconsciously. Jung believed the ultimate goal of psychological development was individuation, the integration of conscious and unconscious aspects of the self, the reconciliation of opposites, the creation of wholeness. This process transforms conflict, because the individuated person no longer depends entirely upon external approval. They no longer fear rejection as intensely. They no longer seek validation compulsively. The crowd loses leverage. The psychological game changes. Imagine again the scenario. 4 people, 1 individual. Most observers focus on the external numbers. The individuated person focuses elsewhere, on awareness, on emotional control, on understanding, on clarity, because clarity reveals something the crowd rarely sees. The crowd itself is often afraid of disagreement, afraid of uncertainty, afraid of standing apart, afraid of questioning collective beliefs. The crowd's confidence frequently depends upon collective reinforcement. Remove reinforcement and confidence weakens. The individuated person derives confidence differently, from self-knowledge, from self-trust, from internal alignment. This creates resilience. The crowd may criticize, the crowd may reject, the crowd may oppose, yet internal stability remains, and internal stability is difficult to defeat. This is why some individuals seem psychologically invincible. not because they are stronger than everyone else, not because they possess extraordinary intelligence, but because they know themselves, and self-knowledge eliminates many forms of manipulation. The shadow no longer operates invisibly, fear no longer controls every decision, the need for approval no longer dominates behavior, the individual becomes free, and freedom changes everything. This reveals the fifth secret of defeating 4 people without fighting. The battle is never truly against the crowd. The battle is against unconsciousness, against fear, against self-deception, against the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The crowd may appear powerful, but the greatest obstacle has always existed within, and the person who conquers that obstacle gains a strength no crowd can easily overcome. For the crowd fights external battles, the individuated person fights internal battles, and internal victories create a form of power far greater than social approval, a power rooted not in dominance, not in intimidation, not in manipulation, but in self-mastery. And once a person reaches that point, standing alone no longer feels frightening, because they are no longer divided against themselves. They have become whole, and there is very little in this world more dangerous than a human being who has truly become whole. At the beginning of this exploration, a question was asked: how can one person defeat 4 people without fighting? Most people approach this question from the wrong direction. They imagine strategies, manipulation, psychological tricks, verbal techniques, methods of gaining advantage. And certainly, such methods exist. Human psychology contains countless mechanisms that can influence behavior, influence perception, influence decisions, influence emotions. But after examining the nature of groups, perception, social dominance, and the shadow, something surprising begins to emerge. The greatest psychological victory is not what most people think it is, because the desire to defeat others often conceals a deeper struggle, a struggle within ourselves. Carl Jung understood this perhaps better than anyone. Throughout his life, Jung observed that human beings are constantly engaged in psychological battles, not merely against other people, but against unconscious forces within, against fear, against insecurity, against envy, against shame, against weakness, against the parts of themselves they do not wish to acknowledge. These internal conflicts shape external reality. The crowd we fear externally often reflects a conflict occurring internally. The criticism that hurts us most frequently touches an insecurity we already carry. The rejection that wounds us deeply often reveals a fear we have never fully confronted. The intimidation we experience often exposes uncertainty within ourselves. This is why external conflicts possess such emotional power. They activate internal wounds. And when internal wounds are activated, objectivity disappears. Emotion takes control. The crowd gains influence. Fear gains influence. The unconscious gains influence. Most people never realize this. They spend their entire lives fighting external enemies, competitors, critics, opponents, rivals. Yet the deeper battle remains untouched. The battle against unconsciousness. The battle against fragmentation. The battle against fear itself. And because that battle remains unresolved, every external conflict feels overwhelming. The crowd appears larger than it is. The threat appears greater than it is. The danger appears more powerful than it is. The individual becomes trapped inside perception, not reality. Perception. This is why the first person you must understand is yourself, before understanding groups, before understanding manipulation, before understanding influence. Understand yourself, because self-knowledge changes everything. A person who understands their fears becomes difficult to frighten. A person who understands their insecurities becomes difficult to shame. A person who understands their desires becomes difficult to manipulate. A person who understands their shadow becomes difficult to control. The crowd loses access to psychological leverage, and leverage is the true source of social power. Without leverage, intimidation weakens. Without leverage, pressure weakens. Without leverage, manipulation weakens. The crowd may still oppose you, but opposition becomes less significant, because your identity no longer depends upon their approval. This realization marks a profound transformation. For most of life, human beings unconsciously seek permission. Permission to speak, permission to think, permission to express themselves, permission to be themselves. The crowd becomes the judge, the crowd becomes the authority, the crowd becomes the source of validation. But individuation requires something different. It requires reclaiming authority, not authority over others, authority over oneself, the authority to think independently, the authority to define one's values, the authority to choose one's path. This is where genuine psychological freedom begins, and freedom is perhaps the most threatening quality an individual can possess, not because freedom harms others, but because freedom cannot easily be controlled. History repeatedly demonstrates this. Tyrants fear independent thinkers. Dogmatic systems fear questions. Authoritarian structures fear self-awareness. Why? Because self-aware individuals become difficult to manipulate. They begin questioning assumptions, questioning narratives, questioning fears, questioning collective illusions. The crowd often interprets this as rebellion, but true individuation is not rebellion for its own sake. It is authenticity, the willingness to see reality clearly, even when reality is uncomfortable, especially when reality is uncomfortable. This brings us to a paradox. The individual who truly understands themselves no longer feels compelled to dominate others. This may seem surprising. After all, much of what we call power appears focused on controlling people. Yet the deepest forms of psychological development move in the opposite direction, toward self-mastery, toward awareness, toward understanding. The integrated individual no longer needs constant validation, no longer needs constant victory, no longer needs constant approval, because their sense of self originates internally, and internal stability creates an entirely different relationship with conflict. Conflict becomes information, not identity. Disagreement becomes perspective, not threat. Opposition becomes challenge, not catastrophe. The crowd may disagree, the crowd may criticize, the crowd may reject, but these experiences no longer define reality. Reality becomes larger than social approval. This is one of the greatest lessons Jung attempted to teach. The self is larger than the persona, larger than social roles, larger than external judgments, larger than collective expectations. Most people spend their lives protecting the persona, protecting their image, protecting their reputation, protecting the mask. But the mask is fragile. Every criticism threatens it. Every rejection threatens it. Every failure threatens it. The self is different. The self remains stable, because it does not depend entirely upon appearances. It is rooted in awareness, and awareness transforms fear. Imagine once more the original scenario. 4 people stand against 1. Most observers immediately focus on numbers. 4 versus 1. The odds appear unequal. The situation appears threatening. Yet psychology reveals a different picture. Perhaps the 4 individuals are driven by insecurity. Perhaps they are driven by fear. Perhaps they are driven by conformity. Perhaps they are driven by collective emotion. Perhaps they are driven by unconscious motives they barely understand themselves. And perhaps the lone individual understands something the crowd does not. That power is not determined by numbers. Power is determined by consciousness. The unconscious person is controlled by circumstance. The conscious person responds to circumstance. The unconscious person reacts automatically. The conscious person chooses responses deliberately. The unconscious person seeks validation compulsively. The conscious person values authenticity more than approval. This difference changes everything, because awareness alters behavior. Behavior alters perception. Perception alters outcomes. Most social battles are decided long before words are exchanged. They are decided internally, through emotional control, through self-awareness, through psychological integration. The crowd may possess greater numbers, but numbers alone do not guarantee influence. History is filled with examples proving this. One philosopher influencing generations, one scientist transforming civilization, one artist changing culture, one thinker challenging entire systems of belief. Again and again, a single individual altered the course of history, not because they possessed superior numbers, but because they possessed superior clarity. Clarity is extraordinarily powerful. The crowd often becomes trapped inside emotion, inside certainty, inside ideology, inside fear. Clarity sees beyond these limitations. Clarity notices contradictions. Clarity notices projections. Clarity notices hidden motivations. Clarity notices reality, and reality eventually defeats illusion. Always. This does not happen instantly. Sometimes illusions survive for years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries, but reality remains patient, and reality eventually prevails. The psychologically mature individual aligns themselves with reality, not comfort, not popularity, reality. This alignment creates resilience because reality does not require defense. Reality simply is. The crowd may reject it, the crowd may resist it, the crowd may deny it, yet reality remains unchanged. The same principle applies internally. Your fears exist whether acknowledged or denied. Your shadow exists whether acknowledged or denied. Your weaknesses exist whether acknowledged or denied. Awareness merely allows you to work with them consciously, and consciousness is transformative. The person who integrates fear gains courage. The person who integrates aggression gains strength. The person who integrates vulnerability gains authenticity. The person who integrates the shadow gains wholeness, and wholeness creates a kind of psychological gravity that few people ever achieve. This gravity cannot be purchased, cannot be faked, cannot be borrowed. It emerges through self-confrontation, through honesty, through awareness, through individuation. This is why the ultimate answer to the question is not tactical, it is psychological. How do you defeat 4 people without fighting? You stop playing the game they expect. You stop seeking approval. You stop allowing fear to dictate behavior. You stop allowing the crowd to define your identity. You stop fighting battles inside your own mind. Because once those internal battles are resolved, external conflicts lose much of their power. The crowd can challenge your opinions, but not your awareness. The crowd can challenge your decisions, but not your self-knowledge. The crowd can challenge your position, but not your inner stability. And stability is the foundation of genuine strength. The crowd believes strength comes from dominance. The wise discover strength comes from integration. The crowd believes power comes from controlling others. The wise discover power comes from mastering oneself. The crowd believes victory means defeating opponents. The wise discover victory means becoming whole, and that is the final secret. The true way to win 1 versus 4 without fighting is to become the kind of person who no longer needs the crowd's permission to stand alone, because the moment you become whole, the crowd loses its power to define you, and in that moment, the battle is already won.